doing, young lady?
About it.
How are you?
Bob Fitzgerald.
I'm Mackenzie Johnson.
We'll go ahead and get started so that we've got some that are joining us online, and I sure would hold them up. Thank you guys so much for coming. It's good to see everyone. I missed last month, so it's double blessing for me, and the fact that it's been a couple months since I've been here. So welcome on behalf of the chapter. And let's see, looking that way for the camera. And again, it's pretty informal, a great time to network. We're going to spend some time together in fellowship with our lunch after our speaker. But in the meantime, let's start our meeting as we normally would. If you would rise with me, and we'll pledge, and then we'll open with the word of prayer. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's say a quick prayer. God, we thank you for this day and for this opportunity to come together as colleagues. We ask that you use us to help others. And of course, for the advancement of your kingdom. We thank you for this food that we'll eat shortly. And we just ask that you give us good fellowship and enable us to network with someone who could help us help you. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Amen. All right. Thank you for coming. Again, we got a couple of things to talk about, but we'll do it after Stephanie's presentation. And without further ado, I've asked Tom Tenyuk to come and introduce Stephanie and perhaps her topic. So Tom, take it away.
Good morning. Thank you for attending in person or by Zoom. Today we have a presentation on the factory. And one of our instructors through the safety program, we will bring do this training is Dr. Stephanie Lynch with OHC and also Safe State.
Bob's here.
Okay, we're going to start with QR codes. So I don't think you get this a lot in presentations, but I'll need you to pull out your cell phone.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is the way that Safe State is going to be able to prove the grant that some training has taken place, and we're going to be doing duties today. So I apologize if it's someone who do have an issue. Let me know. Hopefully you're able to do the attendance quite quickly.
Today is the 17th, if anybody has forgotten.
Slick. Either slick or spooky.
What is that?
For the 100th time.
Like,
Everyone got in there?
No, not yet.
I'm going to go to the next one.
I just think
Oh, okay. The next one's actually a little bit longer.
I'm not a techie person.
You know, unfortunately, I'm not either. We've been part of a learning curve to do training this way. It does end up being really helpful for all the metrics you have to end up keeping.
Is he keep away?
you need some?
I got a brought mine.
Were you able to get there? Okay. Oh, yeah.
Just being real slow.
And if you need to, you can always just use the paper sign sheet for that part. So here's the second one. This is going to be our pre-test. And this is just to see if there's anything you maybe didn't know that then by the end of the test you learned from me. So if you want to get everything going on this, go ahead. Hey, anyone have trouble? Everyone able to get there? I don't even know.
Still on the first one. Still on the first one. What did too fast then?
The attendant's gonna stop. Your name and the date.
No, there's about 10 questions you got to answer.
And type it in the emails was a pain too, because my thumbs are too bad.
That's not the only fat thing on here.
Jay.
So ultimately, everyone was able to get to the attendant.
What are we attending? Infectious disease.
Yes, this is the infectious disease preparedness. The one benefit of those attending online, if they do have trouble, then in the notes, I put they'd be able to just click it. I'm sure it'll be fun to see them. And then everyone was able to ultimately get into the pre-test. Right? Is it going to be horrible if I kind of go ahead and cover just some like housekeeping stuff while you're finishing up that pre-test? Okay. So this is a course that's offered, and I guess I need to click this way. Okay. So here we're going to be talking about the prevention essentially of infectious disease spread or preparation for infectious disease with regards to your workplace. I am Stephanie Lynch. I work for a company called OHD here in Birmingham, Alabama. We manufacture and sell industrial hygiene and safety products, and I function as our in-house hygienist. I actually did just pass my ASP, and then so I'm practically a safety professional. And I'm going to sit for my CSP. Someone said to just go ahead and knock it out as quick as you can. So let's work that. Okay, so just as a disclaimer, this is produced for OSHA. I don't represent OSHA, but we got this stuff approved through OSHA. We do have, in the interest of full disclosure, an OSHA guy in the back, but don't worry, he's evaluating me, not you. And shouldn't follow you out of the parking lot, but I do worry. You said something real bad. So our objectives for this training, and it's I have to click on those. I wanted to see. We want to be able to understand what's happened in the past with pandemics. You know, that's going to help us prepare in the future. I think we know that maybe we didn't do the best job this time of when COVID hit of being prepared and having information flow in a very cohesive and good way. But we're gonna help ourselves here and get a little bit of clarity on maybe how we should prepare. We're going to be able to anticipate, recognize, evaluate, and control some of these pandemic components where we move forward. That's kind of just the way we want to be able to think about there is going to be a next pandemic, right? So what are the things that we can do to anticipate that is going to happen? We're going to understand the application of controls for pandemic events. We're going to have the key aspects of our preparedness plan. And so who in here thinks they need a preparedness plan? If you didn't raise your hand, you might want to rethink it because you do need a preparedness plan. If you're not prepared, right, then you're probably going to fail. That's just one of the things. And then what are some of the best practices for how we implement that plan? So what does this quote mean to any of y'all? Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat.
The same mistakes.
Reinventing the wheel.
Right, and I really feel like we just made it a lot harder on ourselves than we needed to. And maybe that's just a personal opinion, but I do think that if we really do think about what happened over the course of this pandemic, and I know that, you know, we're kind of still in the midst of some after effects of that, but if we really think about what happened, there are ways that we can be better. Okay. So what causes infectious disease? We know about all of these means of contracting. So there can be parasites. So those are the ones that can range in size from one cell to very many. And they include all sorts of things, parasitical infections. Then bacteria, you've probably heard of a lot of these, E. coli, staph, strep, salmonella. I'm pretty sure even the plague was bacterial infection. So, yeah, so lots of bacterial infections that could be out there. Fungus, so that's the one that, you know, if you have like athlete's foot, if you get ringworm, those are all fungal infections. And then viruses encompass a ton more, right? Everything from HIV, herpes, cold, flu, measles, all that stuff is going to be those viral infections. A lot of different things that we want to be able to look at for. And then the types of infectious disease is like then how those are going to be able to be contracted, right? So they can be vector-borne. You can get them from other humans or from certain animals in certain contexts. You know, that's what we think happened with COVID-19, right? That it came from, what was the right thing, from like a bat to a human? Is that where they're saying now that it?
Back to a pig, I think.
Oh, back to a pig to a human. So that's how you can end up having these chains where something goes through. Right. That's that virus mutating to be able to make that jump. And that's what you have to look for when it comes to certain viral infections. Okay, some common vectors are the mosquitoes, fleas. I think actually I'm not going back to that too much, but didn't it end up being that the rat, it was actually the fleas that were on rats? Yeah, so stuff like that does happen, has happened. It will continue to happen. Okay, so which infectious diseases, if just a couple people don't mind involving themselves, are you most at risk for in your company today? Or
Influenza.
yeah, I would say flu is a big one. And I don't know, I'm not a medical doctor, but I do kind of believe in that immunity gap that we made by during COVID, right? Distancing, masking. I don't want to get into I work in respiratory protection, so that one kind of makes me cringe when I talk about masking, but all that stuff, we weren't getting the same exposures that we typically got. So now we're seeing an uptick in a lot of these flus, yeah, all of it. And kids, if you had kids who were stayed home, and now, I don't know if you do, but all my younger nieces and nephews are going out and they're just coming home with everything. One of them had 3 things all at once. So had RSV, flu, and COVID all at the same time. So it's crazy stuff. Okay, what is your employer doing, or you, if you are the employer, doing to protect yourself and your employees? Are you still doing like some pretty in-depth planning?
About the guns, I have it's like an orange citrus top. I can't remember what it's called, but it shoots it. We clean our workstations after they're used. We still do it today. And because it keeps flu and everything down, and healthy employees work. That's just the truth.
It's true. And now I think we were more inclined before the pandemic to, if you had maybe the sniffles and you weren't feeling great, you would just go to work. Whereas now I think you're more inclined at least to go, oh, I better not. I don't want to risk infecting anyone else. So that is kind of a shift.
We are absolutely telling people the old days are over. Suck it up and go to work.
Yeah.
I don't care whether it's a cold or the flu or,
Stay home.
don't bring it in. And we also, for a lot of our people, yeah, it's an administrative thing, but you hear somebody say, oh, I've got a sore throat today, go home.
Yeah, don't be here. It is a weird shift. And I will say that it's, not to be like, yeah, oh, get off my lawn, whatever. But like, it is a sort of generational thing, right? Like, I think that this next generation is going to feel more comfortable with saying, I'm not going to go to work today because I'm not feeling well. Whereas it always did feel to me like I owed my job going, and if there was any effort that I could put in, I needed to do that. And I think it was even more exasperated, you know, older than me. So I'm like 40, and even like the generation up, I think it's even more inclined to be that way. That's actually something I'm kind of on a separate side dealing with my, so when I started my career, I was really worried about these young guys who were coming in and they're always trying to like keep up with the older guys who have more experience and are better at the job, and they'd end up wearing themselves out or hurting themselves. And now I'm on like this flip side where my old guys think they can still do the stuff that they did 20 years ago. You can't, and it's just a different lesson you have to teach. Not related to it, but okay. So some of the different workplace infectious diseases, they can be airborne, they can be bloodborne. And so what's something that we do with regards to bloodborne pathogens? What's a way that you can always protect? Universal precautions. And what does that mean?
Any body fluid, don't touch it.
Right.
You can treat it. You treat it as if it is.
Yes, you treat it as if it is infectious, even if you don't know or not. Waterborne disease. This is actually something that's coming up a lot more with communities, right? So, yeah. And what do you know about your water source that you're because like I realized pretty quickly after we kept seeing all these problems that I've never tested our water. I'm counting on everyone to just do what they're supposed to do, right? And I don't know if you've met the Birmingham Waterworks Board, but I don't know if that's policy.
It's actually a waterborne disease that was the first tracked, you know, when they were actually able to identify what was causing a pandemic in London. You know, there was somebody in
a book about that.
Yes, there is, and he tracked it down to a particular well, and everything, you know, was an outbreak. It was really bad. We were able to track it down to that one well, and that was a huge aha moment in modern medicine.
Yeah, and so we've had all these aha moments. There's a lot of stuff we can learn, and you know, there's a degree of how educated you need to be, but if you start having a few people experiencing symptoms of something, you know, keep in mind there are these different ways that it could be coming. Don't just count out something if you really don't know. Okay, state related. This is a crazy one, but this just happened to the president of my company. He got Lyme disease. He went on a hike with his sons. They're very outdoor people and developed Lyme disease, and he's actually still having some issues with it. And I don't know ultimately what treatment that requires. I know it is very stable, but it stays in you, and it can have after effects for quite some time. Weird random story. I also developed the red meat allergy from a tick bite. Has anyone heard of this?
I've never.
So if you Google it, it's crazy, but it is actually limited, which when I got it, no one told me that. I thought I would have it for the rest of my life, but you only have it for like 3 to 5 years. So I've been cleared for a couple years now and to enjoy a good state of it made me enjoy it more.
It would be one way to get my cholesterol down.
You're not wrong. I was much healthier and about 2 pounds lighter when I was not eating. And the mosquitoes are another big one. Of course, that's you know, malaria is the most well known. And not a big issue here. We've had some heated issues for a while, however long ago. It is something to be aware of. So one of those main ways of transmission is airborne transmission. And I actually contend that a lot of people who knew a lot about transmission really did recognize that COVID was being spread through the air well before anyone was willing to admit that this is being spread that way. And that's one thing that we should be able to address like in a better way in the future, right? If something comes out and there's a pandemic developing, go ahead and implement some of those higher level controls, right? To limit that spread. Because if you just even think it's aerosolized, go ahead and act as though it is, and then start to pull back as you learn more and it can prove that it's not. So like, I don't think that we handled that correctly, ramp up protection and then tear it back. And we did the exact opposite, right? We kept kind of just jumping people. So we kind of already talked about this, but coronaviruses are not anything. You know, COVID-19 was new in 2019, but coronaviruses have been around. and they can cause illness in animals or humans. You can get a respiratory infection, and it can be, some people had no symptoms whatsoever, right? All the way up to having very severe respiratory illness. We covered that pretty well. This is just the most recently discovered one. These are 2020 statistics, so I'm sure they're quite out of date, and it's just depressing to update them. So I'm not gonna update them anymore. We're just gonna move past. Not that we're forgetting, we're just not constantly reminding ourselves of the misery. But so just to kind of touch on, we've done a good job of kind of back and forth talking about these different illnesses, but pandemic influenzas in particular are not new. You know, we had the Spanish flu, we had H1N1, H1N2, H3N2. I mean, I think there's been a lot of iterations of these pandemic influenzas, and SARS-CoV-2 is even, you know, that's another thing that maybe we didn't do the best job of communicating. We were already working on vaccines for SARS-CoV-1, and when SARS-CoV-2 came out, they gave us kind of a leg up. So vaccine, you know, production was actually a little bit ahead of the game, and I don't feel like that was communicated well.
Yeah, I think that was a lot of the problems. It wasn't communicated well. That people thought it was this brand new technology right out of the box.
Right.
Developed in 3 months.
And it would make you very anxious. I think that's a lot of people had a lot of anxiety that as a public health professional looking at the situation, I don't blame them, right? We're not doing the best job. Okay, so just talking about some of the effects of the Spanish flu, where do you think that the Spanish flu originated?
Logic would say Spain.
Yes, and logic would be wrong. So it actually originated here in the United States, but we didn't want to make people feel any more down on themselves, apparently. And so we called it the Spanish flu, but yeah. And so there you go. It originated at Fort Riley, Kansas.
They actually think it was from a big farmer who took.
Well, there you go. So that same jump happening, but you know, disgusting side effects. So we don't have to get into the novel H1N1 pandemic. Does anyone remember when this happened? Yeah.
So I actually have a friend, this kid got that along with something else, perfectly healthy child. She still today can't walk.
Wow.
And I mean, it was paired with something, it was two very rare things at one time. It was a mosquito bite and something else. And she goes to UAB, she still got a trach, she wiggled her toes. It's scary. Perfectly healthy child riding her bicycle, and the next day gets sick.
That's good. I remember this happening, and I was at UAB at the time as a student, and I just remember the hospital taking very serious precautions. I worked at the hospital as the IH tech doing the respirator fit testing, but then I remember nowhere else was really doing anything. You know, like the campus wasn't really responding. No one was really communicating. And so that's something where I feel like hopefully moving forward, we're going to be more quick to respond. Even like now how we do with storms, it feels like we're much better about overreacting, like in a good way, overreacting so that people are protected, letting schools out early, letting people off work early to go handle what they need to get home, not have these traffic problems where people are going to be stuck on 65 in the train. I do think we're doing a better job, and I think that's one way we can better respond to pandemics. Just go ahead and ramp up. This is just a chart kind of comparing, and this is you know, a little bit, there used to be a little bit of misinformation about what the difference was really with severity of COVID-19 and the flu. There were differences. You know, now we're kind of living in a world where they both ramped up at the same time. That's just unfortunate, but that is happening. Just to distinguish though, that seasonal influenza, so that thing we've had, you know, as long as I can remember, is these periodic outbreaks. It's going to typically occur over these winter months, right? And do we know why it happens? It's because we're all not something about, like, as a matter of fact, cold weather is going to fill all actually you should actually see a drop if you want all everything together. On each year, an average of 36,000 people die. Another weird, interesting thing that's come up lately, just talking about all these vaccines that we've come out with, these booster shots. My stepdad got a flu vaccine, and there is a flu vaccine injury that is called, oh, I'm gonna get this wrong, Guillain-Barré? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so he like lost mobility and was on for a while, and you know, of course, there's then all these conspiracy theories about telling people this because he got COVID and the booster at the same time, or it's not. It's been around this whole time, but it is important to be informed that someone doesn't take something like that and use it as, you know, a reason to not do whatever they do need to do to protect them. Okay. But I did learn. I didn't know that was a thing, and it has been interesting. And he has regained lung function. It goes away. And it should go away all the way. Okay, a pandemic influenza is when we have a disease outbreak on a global level. This is when you're going to have serious health outcomes, and when the virus is going to spread very quickly, like personally. And that's when we start to think, right, that it's more likely that that spread will be careful. That's something to consider. If you start seeing it sweep across a country and then ultimately the globe, you might want to be more cautious and assume that it is being spread. Hopefully we all realize at this point that there's a lot of potential impact, whatever the next pandemic might be, pandemic influenza in the United States. So severity can vary, but a lot of these that do end up becoming pandemic level can be very severe. I don't think we need to be on that. TB is another thing that's been around for a long time. It's kind of gotten pushed a little bit to the background. When I was working at UAB, there was actually a big issue with the homeless population developing a strain of TB that was it was resistant to all of the treatment. And so I would have people at 3 a.m., you know, calling me and saying, well, now I really need my fit test. And I was like, well, but I gave you a fit test. And they were like, yeah, that's how I lied. I need to get a fit test now where I actually tell you the truth about whether I can taste it or not and make sure I'm accurate. Yeah. So that was happening back then, but TB is just something else good to know about what can happen. These are some of the main symptoms. Bacterial infection. The overall rate in the US for 2019 was 2.7 cases per 100,000 people. And the state rates, there was some pretty high variability that you can see there. So the lowest was 0.2 in Wyoming, all the way up to 8.1 in Alaska. It attacks your lungs, and there is a vaccine, but like I said, there have been some concerns, and I do not know where this stands currently with whether something is vaccine resistant, as we see these things. Okay, we talked about the most important aspect of bloodborne pathogens, which is that using universal precautions, where we're going to assume, no matter what, that bodily fluid is infectious, and we're going to treat it as such. And that is something that is you are doing in your workplaces, hopefully, to help prevent the spread of some pretty bad stuff. Okay, hepatitis B and C. This is a very infectious disease. It attacks the liver. There's hepatitis A, C, E. It's a bloodborne pathogen. They're transmitted different ways. It's been sort of proven, this is just kind of important, that HBV can remain viable for those 7 days in a dry state. So if it's just like sitting on a counter, that's why we want to do some of these cleaning things. My office and Ramp did the same thing, ramped up our cleaning procedures, and we now have a once weekly sort of deep clean that goes through and targets sort of our high touch areas, but really does the whole office. And it's not terribly expensive, all things considered.
Cheap, really cheap.
Yeah, it's really cheap for what it is. So this slide just shows figures that are going to apply to the general population as a whole. Some of the symptoms, you can have loss of appetite, loss of energy, nausea, vomiting, fever, and they can vary, again, pretty greatly. The asymptomatic stuff, actually, with COVID-19, that was the first time I'd really heard about that you could have, an asymptomatic person, and then they were also people spreading the virus. But it is important to know that is better about not going to work with students that hopefully being checked out by a doctor. But okay. Hepatitis C affects 4 times as many people as HIV. We have 4 million Americans who have HCV, and about only a quarter of those who are infected have been diagnosed. So just kind of an important thing to note when you think about why we treat things as, you know, always possibly infectious. It's because there are a lot of people out there who could have something and they're not aware of it. They haven't been diagnosed. Okay, HIV, hopefully we all have some familiarity here. It attacks certain cells of your immune system that are known as those T cells. And those are kind of part of the first line of defense, right, for our immune system that fights infection. And that's why it's so important that you have the right count of those T cells. If you don't, it gets out of whack. That's how the virus is able to do things. It actually makes your body turn on itself, essentially. And so when you ultimately have AIDS and then end up dying, you actually end up dying usually from some infection that's not related to, it's because your body can't fight it appropriately. So rolling into AIDS, that's just what then ultimately, so it's acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, and HIV virus over time will usually succeed well untreated. HIV over time will succeed in reducing the available number of those T cells to like a very, very low level. And then these, I don't know what a better way to call them, but like opportunistic pathogens and cancers that otherwise your body would have been able to get rid of are going to be able to cause the disease. So when they're first infected with HIV, you likely have no symptoms, or you may have a little bit of flu-like symptoms. And then 3 to 10 years, you can develop AIDS after that initial infection. Now, this is all again, if you're going to you get treatments. My understanding is that there are very effective treatments now for HIV. Okay, waterborne illnesses. One of the main ones that you'll hear about is Legionella. Trying to think about, there was definitely that Philadelphia event, 34 people died at American Legion convention. It was this like groundbreaking investigation that explained why all these people got sick. Apparently there's a Forensic Files episode on it if you want to check it out. And then the Legionnaires is spread when microscopic airborne droplets of water are inhaled by a person who's at risk. Or, I mean, but early symptoms, you're going to have that low fever, headache, aching joints, fatigue, lack of energy, and loss of appetite. All of those things, you end up having several people who are in the same building, especially if you have a site that has kind of outdated plumbing system. This is something you might want to think could be happening. I worked at a DOD site in Germany. We had Legionella pop up in our schools, and that's where we were then able to identify that it was kind of proliferating through the entire community. Some of the levels were just so low, but we were able to act hopefully quicker to keep it from continuing to perpetuate throughout this water system. But that was quite a nightmare, and it is a hard thing to ultimately get rid of. Okay, so the proportional contribution and then like clinical importance of all the possible modes of transmission, that's something that we want to, this kind of goes back to what I said about how it's just better to go ahead and ramp it up. So I think that a lot of public health officials ended up trying to wait to see how they could identify which modes of transmission were the most important before they implemented the controls for that. And really, I think that we should just assume that it's going to be transmitted in all of those ways, protect as such, and then start tiering back, right? So when it says knowing the modes of transmission, yes, that's going to be very valuable in establishing what are the appropriate controls. But before you know, then maybe assume that it's the airborne transmission and go ahead and apply controls as such. And then, like I said, tier back. So these are all those different ways that pathogens can transmit. Actually, the next slide is again about these similarities, but I feel like we talked quite enough and I don't want to be too far behind. Okay, so a quick case study. You're the industrial hygienist for a company in the northeastern United States. Within one of the buildings on site, over the course of a few months, several employees complained of headache, chills, cough, shortness of breath, muscle pain, and fever. What are you going to do?
Investigate.
You're going to investigate it. And what's one of maybe the first steps you would do in that?
Yeah, I would look, personally, I would look for like mold and things like that to make sure that's not an issue.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with
It's
doing
all
that.
in the same area and how many people are having it. It's over a long period of time.
And sampling for mold is a weird thing because, you know, you hire an industrial hygienist, I'm sure they're going to be willing to sample your mold for you, but know that you are going to find mold. So it's more about recognizing what what kind you have and what the danger is there. So maybe it's from your water, right? Sampling the water. And there's anything that it could be. And I actually don't know. There's a case study I have with an answer that you do need more about this to do that investigation. And then
I think questioning the employees to see what things are having in common.
Yeah.
It's huge.
That's a huge thing. That is a huge problem. So we're going to investigate. And the way that we do that is doing a hazard assessment. When you talk about a hazard assessment, this is actually something that you should be applying really towards any hazard that you could have in your workplace, not just infectious diseases, right? But a big part of that is communicating with your employees the purpose of that hazard assessment and that you're performing it, right? All of your employees, you know, you can't know every job on your site as well as the person performing that job. So involving them in that hazard assessment is really critical, even when it comes to talking about infectious disease. You may think that things are a certain way, but if you're not doing that job, then you're not really going to know how they're performing that job. Just because it's what you would do doesn't mean that's exactly what you do, right? You were weird. You're going to want to review any available data if you have any. You're going to definitely want to actually observe the situation of all of your employees, and then you're going to assign a hazard risk level. Now, this, you know, calling them very high, medium, and lower risk, that's a very common way of distinguishing risk. But for the record, there are resources on OSHA's website that would help you identify within the context of COVID-19 and a eventual pandemic in the future, how to figure out which of those categories you're in. That's when you're then going to want to talk about what controls you need to put in place. And then, you know, what do we do with any of our safety or industrial hygiene or health programs? We document everything.
Don't just focus on infectious disease, because those same things could have been caused by carbon monoxide or something. So you could go back and say, hey, every time we burned this, or you know, every time people got sick, we were burning this as well. And that leads to, hey, we've got a problem with an incinerator or a problem with the furnace, or
that is such a good
so point. It's more than just look outside. It could be a chemical thing every time we transfer chemicals, you know, or
yeah, it could be so much stuff. And I even one time, so like we had a plant-wide ban on methyl ethyl ketone. Like you could not use it in the site. And then I had some people getting sick on this one particular line. And like, I just, you know, I'm like, God, I can't figure this out. And we go out and we're talking to the guy and he's got this little can of stuff to dissolve paint off of some of these. And I'm like, where did you get that? He's like, oh, I brought it home. It works way better. It works way better than that stuff that we have here. And you're just like, you can't. He's like, no, you don't understand. It works way better. He's like, that's you're not wrong. But you're not the point. So there's a lot of things that can come up where people are getting sick. And if you don't, because you're sitting there going, well, it can't be this because we don't even have that risk factor here. We substituted the less harmful chemicals. We've made this huge run. Well, you have to go talk to people and see what they're doing. Sometimes you're not going to like what they're doing, but you just have to understand that that stuff is. So like I mentioned, these are those categories. And OSHA does have ways that you're going to be able to identify which category you fall in for anything, but for this pandemic influenza type event. This is an available video for risk, and it comes from AHA, and it is a really good video. We don't really have time to watch it, but I sent the slides And you have those, and it's the real slides, like not like a PDF. So you'll be able to click in there and watch that video. Okay. Oh, I'm just gonna try to play it anyway. Okay. So when we talk about controlling these hazards that we have on site, again, this is something that's applicable to any of these hazards. You want to be able to apply the hierarchy of controls. Are we all familiar with the hierarchy of controls? I would hope so. It's the safety group, should be. So we're first, and I didn't put this up here, but so of course, what's the very first thing we want to see if we can do? Eliminate. We want to see if we can eliminate. Then we're going to try to what? Yeah. Well, we're going to try to substitute too. That's another way that you can substitute for something less harmful. Then we've got our engineering controls. It is a type of engineering. It's neither here nor there, but that's also how they split this up here. So work practice controls are technically administrative controls, but sometimes it helps to break it up this way so that people understand that there's a distinct category where you can control how the work is performed, and that's going to help you eliminate some of the risk in certain situations. And then what is our very last line of defense? And why is that our last line of defense?
You're still exposed to the hazard.
Yes, the hazard still exists, right? And now you're putting the onus kind of on the person to protect themselves, which, as I just discussed, may not be the best policy.
You're relying on the person to say they can taste it.
Yeah. Right? No, now I want my real fitness. Okay, thank you. My dog is meeting us. So what did I do? So this is that hierarchy of controls, just as a graphic. So engineering controls, that's when we're going to have actual physical barriers. This is when you're going to be talking about ventilation. That's actually something that I think just sort of as an emerging issue, we're going to kind of see maybe start to take place is, so right now your HVAC system, whether it's at your office or in your home, what is it relying on to get the air to all the same temperature? It's relying on turbulence. It's mixing all that air up. And so when we talk about COVID, something like that, what does that mean for COVID transmission? It means you're just getting it to everybody, spreading it all around. So if your concentrations get high enough, you're talking about exposing everyone who's in that room or whatever it may be. So I really think we will start to see more laminar flow means doing ventilation, which is a way of controlling things where the airflow moves uniformly in a direct line. That air then is just going down and out essentially. So you don't have it getting picked up. So I think in a lot of sites you're going to see, you know, especially if they're at very high risk. So maybe in hospitals, stuff like that, where you're going to see, you know, I know we're very slow to actually implement things like this in new buildings. It's a huge cost, but stuff like that in the future, I do. Okay, building an enclosure, another example of engineering controls, totally containing the hazard. This is just, so a sharps disposal container is an example of one of those physical guards, a well-known device. You see this in purposes. So they have to be, you know, there's a lot of standards for what that has to be an appropriate sharps disposal container. Some physical barriers. One thing we saw a lot through COVID were these screens, right? The plexiglass like screens between you and the person. But what did you 9 times out of 10 have to do when you're having to communicate?
Well,
reach to it.
Hey, so maybe not the best. This is something again where you go out and you actually look at it and you go, okay, maybe this wasn't the most effective means. They actually still do have them in a lot of places, and you're still having to, you know, lean around because they can't hear you. Ventilation is one of our biggest ones. This is a really effective, when implemented appropriately, ventilation can be a very effective control for a lot of different hazards, whether it can be in the workplace or infectious disease. They now have a lot of air cleaners that you can put in your office. Just make sure you're using an appropriate filter, and then make sure that your placement is appropriate, right? If we're talking about how air is moving, if you have a big group of people and you put where the air is pulling, you know, pulling it all across each other, that's maybe not the best means of controlling anything. We don't need to, this is just an example of how someone utilized it. I also don't think you're going to need, I mean, it is important to understand how we talk about air changes per hour. You know, it is important, but I don't think you're going to have to do any of these calculations. But when we talk about how you want to, you might hire someone in your office, but if you want to, if there are spaces, you're going to be able to see with ANSI or ASHRAE. ASHRAE probably has like the most up-to-date stuff, where you can go see what the best air changes per hour or per minute that you should have in your facility. And you can sit there and do the calculation to figure out exactly what's best for you. So when we talk about administrative controls, we're talking about our training, we're talking about how we tell people to work. One thing that you hear a lot about now is job rotation. I'd be really wary with the introduction of that in certain situations, because you're actually just exposing a greater population to a hazard. So depending on the hazard, just keep that in mind, right? Because you just now have a greater population, and so you're introducing the higher likelihood of someone being sensitive to that hazard. When you think about something like noise or an ergonomic hazard, maybe job rotation isn't your best solution. Here's one that was super effective, but maybe not always applied appropriately. My biggest issue with physical distancing or social, physical distancing, whatever you want to call it, is that you tell people that you wanted them to be physically distanced, but then you would have spaces that had things like this where, 2 chairs are within 6 feet of each other. So you're not making it easy for people to obey the rules that you're saying you implement. So if you do end up having to implement physical distancing again, please make sure that you're making it very easy for your guys. Have where their breaks are, what's the right word for that? You let some people go and then
do alternate.
Make sure you have your break time staggered for the appropriate amount and not have too many people. We used to have all of our breaks at the exact same time. So our warehouse employee, and we thought at the time that was so good for workplace cohesion, right? Team building. And when it's the break at the same time, they're going to get to talk. And during COVID, that wasn't the appropriate response. When you talk about training, you want to make sure that it's interactive. You want to make sure that it's given by someone knowledgeable. Y'all clearly didn't check up on my credentials, but that's not there. And then we talk about personal protective equipment. And just keep in mind that, so when a good example of this, a lot of my customers, when COVID-19 started making it where their employees couldn't come to work, they were like, no, we want them here. We're going to just give them all N95s and then we'll be good. And that's not how any of that works. If you give your employees N95 respirators for protection against a hazard, you're number one acknowledging that that hazard is a workplace hazard. And you are now going to need to implement an entire respiratory protection program, which if you look at this, this is a big deal. It's not as simple as give them all N95s. So just keep in mind, a lot of these PPE groups have a whole, standard to them. Like you have to go and figure out exactly what you need for your employees if you're going to implement these personal protective equipment. You have to make sure that your employees have whatever's necessary, whatever's appropriate. Another thing is providing a sort of enough variability or variety that people can find something that's comfortable and works for them, but not so much that it's overwhelming. It's a logistical nightmare for you, first off, but humans have this weird thing where if we have too many choices, it's like how you'll see people stand in front of the jellies for like 10 minutes, right? And they're like, I can't even pick. There's so many jellies to choose from, or like the pickles. And why are there 10 different kinds of pickles? But stuff like that, humans end up taking a lot of time. We're not going to cover the difference in facial coverings, mostly because it gives me a lot of anxiety. Okay, now we're rolling into the section of the training. This is our last little part where we're going to talk about sort of best practices for business and generalizations for how you can prepare, because hopefully it's very clear to you that whatever you do prepare would be very specific to your workplace. But there are some sort of overarching generalizations. So the first thing we're going to do, right, is actually make a plan. We're going to be intentional about developing some sort of plan for how we will react. I don't know if any of y'all, so for my company, I'm the only one who's anything like safety or industrial hygiene. So COVID became very much my problem. And so of course, at first I was like, yes, I'm the person for this and I know exactly what I'm doing. Until about, I realized I have no idea what I'm doing. And actually the people who make me do this are IT and HR. Like, you want me to have my whole group go for both? And I don't have any skills in that. So there's a lot of stuff. But make sure you train your staff on what your plan is, and then make sure that it does appropriately address any of your PPE things that you do decide to do. Okay. You're going to identify all of your different job tasks. You're going to break it into steps. This is all again about best practice for that hazard assessment. Assess the risk, how you're going to control it, and then most importantly, communicate it effectively. And I mentioned involve the real stakeholder, that person who's actually doing that job. If you haven't, and then you just come up to them and you're like, this is what we're doing now, and this is how we're going to handle it, it's not going to go over very well. Make sure you communicate. Make sure that everyone is protected as in the way that they should be, and that they're given equal protection in the ways that are available. Make sure you're performing all of the appropriate record keeping. Keep all of your training records. Make sure you have copies of all of your programs. And then, oh, that's what I meant to mention on the last thing was that, oh gosh, the tracking of all of the COVID exposures. So we all know what a nightmare that was. And if you ever end up, God forbid, having to implement that again, just, hopefully you're better prepared to deal with it. So when you have someone who's maybe been sick, you're able to better track who they've been around, or maybe you've already implemented things that will limit other people's exposure to other people so that the tracking doesn't become so difficult. Another thing is if you're able to stockpile some things that you do know you'll need for your company to be able to maintain operations. A big part of this is you can't just buy as much as you want and then keep it somewhere, right? There's a lot of other considerations with that. How long is its shelf life? Can it be exposed to moisture? All sort of things. So it's not as quick as just buying what you need. Just make sure that you have some means essentially written down of who's responsible for what part of the stockpile, and then like a rotation schedule that acknowledges its shelf life and storage requirements. So you need to identify a person who is responsible for your actual response plan. I mentioned that it needs to be developed with employee involvement. It's going to have to look at the associated risk. So you're going to apply that hierarchy of controls. You're going to have a contingency plan for any possible outbreaks. It's going to list off all the infection prevention measures that you're going to implement. Like I mentioned earlier, go ahead and ramp it up, implement those maybe strictest policies, and then start tearing it back. And then the case tracking, and follow CDC recommendations to the extent that is appropriate for your business. That is one thing that I will say is one thing I've learned in safety is when we try to just follow recommendations or rules, that it actually can introduce a problem. So for instance, the best one I can think of is there was an explosion of an oil rig off the Gulf Coast. And there was a rule on the site that if there was any sort of event that you went from this one specific area, and it was the area that would be best protected, you were never supposed to jump off the edge of the rig. And so this event happens, one guy jumps off the rig, that's the only guy who survives. Because in that specific instance, it wasn't appropriate for everyone to go to this specific area that was protected. This explosion was beyond the capabilities of the rig. That all to say, there's some safety policies where we've tried to, engineer out any human fallibility. And in some instances that can sort of reduce the human's ability to respond the way that they really should to protect themselves. Another good example of this is we had a group that was doing, they were laying the asphalt. I'm not an expert in this, so I was just getting to observe, but they're laying asphalt and a guy's rolling behind them as they're doing something. They're having to sit there and whatever the process is. But so when the people used to do it and they had no means of like an alarm or whatever, they would stay about 12 feet ahead of the roller. Well, this guy gets to go in and he implements alarms because they want to make it a safer process. So they implement these alarms that are going to go off whenever the guys are within 6 feet. Well, then when you go observe the process, all the guys are within 6 feet. And so now if you have, before that, they were staying 12 feet ahead. And so once they learned that there was an alarm, they actually put themselves at greater risk if they're closer to this roller, that if something does go wrong with that alarm system, now you have less time to react. So it's just stuff like that where don't just blindly follow the CDC's recommendations, right? Be educated, do follow them, but keep yourself informed. Okay, I'm sure we all recognize how COVID disrupted our respective businesses, right? Absenteeism is just one of those things for all of these different reasons. That person themselves can be sick, they have to care for a sick person. How many of us had to go home because our kids couldn't go home to school, had to become teachers, right? Or maybe you're just afraid to come to work. I had to deal with that. I was afraid to come to work. And how do you handle that? So we mentioned this, all of us should have a plan. We want to make sure that we're continuing to evaluate that plan. So put it on a schedule where you're able to come back and review it with the appropriate stakeholders. And then also make sure you know what resources are available to you for like both critical infrastructure stuff, but then also people and groups that are local in place to help with regarding some sort of outbreak. How many of us weren't quite sure, you know, when those PPP loans came out? Y'all had the same issues that we did. We didn't know exactly if we qualified, if we should take it. What does it mean if then we don't need it? What if we don't take it, we need it? Look at all those issues they had with those plans. Like, right. So know what is available to you. These are just some other considerations about the impact on your business. One thing that I wasn't aware of, and this is why I said I felt like I needed either HR or IT. I didn't understand that if you allow like one employee to do something because of their particular circumstance, you have to make that available to all of your other employees. Like there are things that you have to consider beyond just someone's experiences and their stuff. And I didn't fully grasp that. So you have a plan that's specific for your business. You're going to inform everyone on every aspect of that. You do want to put yourself out there. If you're the person who's responsible for this plan, you want to put yourself out there where you take your employee questions and respond to them in a respectful way. And then I mentioned just coming back and reviewing. So here's kind of our other question, and I kind of gave away the ones I thought. But when you think about preparing for the next event, who do you want on your team? So I mentioned, you know, I really was weak in HR and IT, and those were the two I would. But y'all still, what would you want on your team? Because you're probably on the team if you're saying team. Anyone else?
You need somebody from upper management that's going to back you up when you say this is what we need to do.
I would agree with that. That's what, I have no one who I directly manage, and I'm out here telling people what to do, and they're looking at me like I have four heads. So I had to get our president to be the one to say, right, hey, this is a serious issue. We're taking it seriously. An interesting fact with my business was I came out with these policies, and upper management would be the first people to break it. So originally we had a policy, if you travel, then you had to stay home, work from home remotely for 5 days before you could come back in. That was my best practice. And all of a sudden, I'm getting management guys, they're just coming in, and they have not, and I'm like, people see that. You're showing them this is not important to you. And it's just like they kind of thought, well, no, it's, you know, it's different. I'm management. No, yeah, it is different. You are management. You have to be the first one to follow the policies appropriately. So make sure that everyone's communicating on what's going on. So I mentioned that I needed someone who was on HR, but there's tons of other things. You know, the biggest one is making sure that people are going to still get paid appropriately, right? that would be a huge thing to mess up on. And then some of these other things, community and government, what is available for you, what your employees need, and have you educated them appropriately. The very hardest step with the you know, development of a plan is just getting started. So just do get started, pick an area that you're going to feel comfortable with, and knock it out. What do you say? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. There you go. Okay. From here on out, these are all resources. And like I mentioned, you're going to have this actual PowerPoint sent out to you. So it will have these links and they will function. These are just all sorts of things. These were fact sheets that were industry specific that were developed. And so if you want to go look at one of those for your specific industry, if it's available, then you'd be able to identify some ways to begin that preparedness plan. These are resources that are specific for personal protective equipment. Again, some of them broken out by industry. Some other helpful resources, which you can just easily Google, is the NIOSH Health Hazard Evaluation Program. There's OSHA consultation services, so shout out to Big State. I am not one of their consultants, I'm not one of their trainers, but they have consultants available. They're a free service that can come out and help you with whatever you may be concerned about. They have experts in probably everything. I mean, and then they have Tom, but other than that, and then there's a lot of other general COVID-19 resources out there. Okay. Sorry, guys, more QR codes. So everyone go do your post test. And this time it would be really important if you could get them right.
It's open book, right?
It's so hard being up here and knowing like I'm the thing standing between you and lunch. Okay, let's see that. If you and then let people still see it though, maybe minimize the. And if you go to the attendance slide, so all the way back to the very beginning, did everyone pull up the post test?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll go ahead and go to it and we'll come right back to it. And the link is right there. We'll just send that to the chat.
Okay.
You just copy that and then they should just be able to click it. And hey, Cheryl, I see you on there.
Hey.
Cheryl's my favorite because she gets me paid. Okay, so then the very last thing is the evaluation. And so if you enjoyed the training, and my name is Stephanie Lynch. If you did not enjoy the training, my name is Scott Herndon. Better way not here.
You make that later again.
We presented it again.
Oh, without
Because it's not. Mine's not showing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so
The slides, yeah, there goes.
yes.
Did you already get post test?
I got the post test.
Evaluation.
And just thank you guys so much. I really appreciated your time and attention.
Thank you.
I didn't even ask the, does anyone have any questions?
Probably just had a comment. Most basic thing that I see on a construction site, everybody here probably is fairly educated. I don't get more educated than me for sure, but the laborers out there, they don't do hygiene. I mean, I go out on construction sites and the basic thing of teaching people to wash their hands is real. I'm not saying you got to do it in front of them, but just give them something, some type of training on it, because I can't tell you On construction sites sit all day, they go in, they come out, go right back to work, and they still do it even with COVID, nothing's changed. Talk about it all day. The other thing, when you're implementing like facial coverings, one thing that we ran into, it's unlikely when they're welding to get hit in the face with slag or something like that, but a lot of facial coverings are flammable. And so a lot of job sites required it, and so I had to reach out and find like a cotton, basically like it looks like a shirt sleeve. It goes around just because they require facial covering on the job sites. And I do think that sometimes we go overboard, because if I've got a person 40 feet up in the air in a man lift, he's not going to be exposed to COVID.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
there are like common sense things like that, but I feel like it's got totally
way out of the way. Some GCs just went over the top, didn't care. And so I think common sense plays a huge role in that.
It is because the difficulty to do the specific, right? That's one thing that I find with my respirators. And the big thing is like whether you can have patient. And they'll be like, but hey, I can pass the test, or hey, I can do it. And it's not as much. I mean, OSHA just strictly precludes you cannot have facial hair, so that I can default to that. But when you try to then look at the implementation of, is there a certain amount of facial hair that some people could have and still be fine? There is, but now you're talking about, you probably have to have an entire other standard developed for what is the exception here, what amount of hair. So that's what ends up happening, is I think people just go, okay, no, blanket policy, way easier to just have a blanket policy than to go, okay, we make an exception.
I agree.
But it is hard. If you can put the time and thought into it, you already have some sort of plan, it sure does seem like you could go, hey, from anybody, you don't have to have your budget.
All right, while we're finishing up, if you would, again, thank you, Stephanie. Go ahead and grab lunch, and we'll. Oh yeah, and let me present you with this. Presented to us so many times. There you go. You didn't hear it. It's so not so coveted. Get lunch. I'll give you about 5 minutes to dig in, and then we'll cover a couple of items we need to as business points. And then you guys feel free to network as long as you would. Restroom down, all the way down to the end of the hall left, and then on the right. Yeah.
There's turkey, ham, roast beef, some salad, or maybe a chicken salad or something like that. And there's some white and some wheat as well.
Wow.
I'm trying to get it for everybody.
Just take the bread off.
Let's go.
That's good. It's good eating.
I love them. They love like chicken rolls. I can eat those.
I learned a lot for that. So, you know, I figured, yeah, sure, I can do it.
I got stuck.
Pretty much gets the grease salad at the bottom.
A couple of those for the
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you a call on Tuesday. No, that's.
No, is that like a problem?
Talking about you. You were. To Mackenzie here, she's with Jackson State.
Hi.
And I was asking if you had a role. Nobody's asked me for any help. You're gonna eat lunch with us? Thanks for coming. You definitely want to do that.
We're trying to get something going over in that area. The whole section over there just kind of died.
Oh, that doesn't.
She's how many do you have?
This one's just a student chapter.
Oh, say I'm talking.
Yes,
or anybody over there.
So Dr. Godby, he won't be our faculty advisor. He's just relaxing right now.
Who's gonna be your
Will Yarbrough.
Okay.
And then Dr. Inglesby, which is our department head, will be the executive faculty advisor. We've just started it back. Like we haven't even gotten all here.
I'm in that area, so
Thank you.
I'm the Alabama Mississippi area director for states right now. So but I live right outside Anniston. I live at Jefferson's. I work in Anniston at the hospital.
Yeah.
I'm in Anniston.
With the ASSP, we're considered a chapter, so we're not having to start that over. But with Jackson will state itself, we're having to start over. That's great. So we have
to do that every year or two because you have people graduate. As far as I know,
yeah.
Keep the pipeline full if you can.
The last time, just senior. I'll graduate. And so, okay, all right, I will. Thank you.
And I know they changed a lot. Unfortunately. The internet. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm just gonna hang around here. Soon I'm here, so why not just hang around?
Kind of what I was thinking. Basically, you've got internet here. I think I can get on the Zoom without any problem. Did you see Alan?
Gonna make it.
Did you see Alan's email? She's in Chicago, so we're actually having to use my Zoom today because UAB's is not available. So there was a meeting invite that was sent out yesterday by me.
Yeah, I saw yours.
But that's actually the meeting invite to get on my Zoom. No, it wasn't the new one.
Yeah, I saw yours. I just assumed I'd just be here anyway. I put it on.
Well, woke up this morning and realized, hey, today's the meeting day, and I actually don't have to work today. First time on a Friday that I haven't worked in months. And I ended up working Wednesday. No. Yeah, that's right. Now we're what's going to happen? I've got the gateway here. It's not at that work under. I typically don't work on Monday. Thank you very much. Past week. Last on Monday.
Hospital again?
No chapter.
Yeah.
I was doing it voluntarily, and about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, they asked me to do it a couple of days a week. I who'd been the full-time chaplain there for 20 years is 80 years old. He was having to slow down a little bit. I got 2 or 3 days a week.
No, I didn't send a note. So are you doing keto as well, or are you just waiting to wait for him? I'm not sure what you do.
I usually work.
So I was thinking.
His wife had a doctor's appointment in Birmingham, and he wanted to go with her. We swapped out today and Wednesday.
Yeah, she's it out within the company. That's one all the time.
I have two of them.
That's no easy ride between Louis and Montgomery or anything that
Change behaviors, it's not gonna do anything. It's gonna harm you. Then you're just gonna do this over and over.
Let me take just a quick minute while you guys are visiting and we usually have one official item to cover. So I'll switch from our normal casual networking and just serve as a facilitator under Robert's Rules of Order and call us to attention or call us to a business item, and that is our slate of officers. We recently received from our nomination committee a slate of officers that have been found and agreed to serve. And so Matt Hollop served as our nominating committee chair, and his committee brings forth today a list of 4 names for our May election. Our bylaws currently require us to notify everyone within 60 days of the vote. And so we are meeting that requirement, as will this nomination slate be published hereafter. In the event that you want to nominate someone, according to our bylaws, it requires that nomination to be official and accompanied by 10 signatures of active members, and then provided to our chair, which would be Matt Hollop, at least 30 days prior to election time. So you guys do happen to have someone, and I'll offer that again once we get to the official process of it. So that list of names, just want to go ahead and read that for you. Is Tom Tenyuk, who's here. Tom currently serves as the chairman and president of the Tuscaloosa, West Alabama section, and has served this chapter before in numerous capacities, to include president. So, and then Justin here. You guys all know Justin. Justin is our in charge of our programs currently, and a very active member of this chapter for quite some time. Vincent is our secretary president. In my many absences, and in his current role, had a good fit in the secretary and supports him and what he needs and doesn't need in his life right now. So he's agreed to serve. Thank you for that. And then Alan Holliday, who has served a lot of years in that I call it trustee, but it's treasurer position. Don Placey happens to be here today, who happened to serve. I don't know, maybe he's got a century or two on her. And he served in that capacity. Never brought her into that position, served by her side for a few years, and then Alan's been off and handling it well. While Alan hasn't been with us very much in person, she always stays in touch with us and handles our financial affairs nicely. And without further ado, this is the nomination committee's recommended slate of officers for the 2023-2024 elections. So it comes from our committee.
So it really doesn't need a motion to accept them or a second to continue. So I'll open up for any questions anyone might have. And then I will ask for everyone, I will ask for a vote. So is there any questions, comments, critiques, concerns, anything that we need to discuss about this? Anybody want to tell a funny story about Benny? 70 gig Tom already once today, so that's always good. Again, great organization, great group of folks. I almost said men, but a great group of people with with our best interests in mind. So without any questions on the floor, anyone online, anybody saying anything behind me? I don't even know if there's anybody still on there, Vincent. Can you tell me if there is? Nope. Okay. Well, and I looked that way. I meant to look that way, so it's just confusing this thing. But anyway, so all in favor of accepting this slate of officers proposed for the May elections, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign, and it unanimously carried. As far as new business is concerned, are there any new items that the group or announcements or happenings within your organizations that you care to share officially with the group? Please. Wayne Jackson, by the way, for those of you who may not know him.
Your updated bylaws were signed by me one day last week, so you are officially updated on all your bylaws.
Excellent.
So Daniel also signed those as well. So your director, I signed them, and his legal vice president signed those, and that was done. Also, we did Pine Belt and Mississippi chapter, Jackson, Mississippi. Well, we did 3 last week. Good. Also, kind of as an area announcement, Athens State University has just applied for a student section out of the Northeast Alabama chapter. So Athens State will now have a student section that will be sponsored by the Northeast Alabama chapter. And if you've not registered for the PDC, please do that. It's going to be in Tuscaloosa on 26th and 27th of April.
Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah.
If anybody wants to see a program, I left it on the front seat of my car, but I actually put it out the program. So if anybody wants that, I'll run out and get it.
Would, because when I click on it, I get a block, and our IT has not removed that block. That particular.
Well, I'll run out and get it right now, so anybody wants to look at it can look at it. I printed it off and then left it laying in the front seat of my car.
We're also the host chapter.
Yeah,
so if you volunteer, help as a moderator, tracks that we have for the sessions that we're doing, we do the moderator to assist in that. Or Bob, the moderator for that.
You have to be a member to be a moderator?
Pardon?
You have to be a member to be a moderator?
Probably not. And let me bring this up, May 10th, City of Tuscaloosa, safe state. OSHA too, but I can't really say that. 911, not 911, 811. We are doing an excavation trenching event. Let's call it an event. I don't want to call it a class. I don't want to any session. We're actually going to dig some trenches. We're going to put boxes in to show you how not to do excavation. We're also going to have one that's supposedly going to be perfect. OSHA will give you how they do it, basically an inspection of a trench or excavation. 811 will be there to tell you, you better call us before you dig. Reynolds will be there providing the trenches, and we'll discuss their equipment. Safe State will be there. We'll talk about soil mechanics. So if you know what soil you're in, what's the mechanics of it, so it doesn't collapse on you. It'll be a pretty good event. It's going to be a half-day event, about 3.5 hours, limited to 100 at this time.
Have you already advertised?
Yeah, it's going to be this month.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Will there be a cost?
Free unless the company would love to provide breakfast. It's gonna be free. If this goes well, we'll probably do it again in the city of Tuscaloosa this fall.
What's the location?
It's where their recycling center is. I don't know the actual address yet.
We'll be looking for that, and we'll be certain to publicize that through the website. Any other announcements?
Yeah, just, she's construction, Bob, and Justin and Bob, all three. So we, in safety, there's no competition, right? So we all three talk about this meeting in ABC, Alabama. We have a meeting at ABC, Alabama on the second Friday in the mornings. It's at 7 o'clock downtown. Owners, it's safety people, but it's geared towards construction. But if they're in that world, it's a great meeting. In that meeting, we tell them this is a great meeting, so we try to more of it vouch for that. So
Cross-pollination.
yeah, you want to come? It's a really good group.
Drew, and to echo that, we have the man himself in the room.
Right.
That started that committee in 1832. John started the ABC Safety Committee himself. He is the originator. He is the OG right there. There he is.
So it's a great.
Still going, John. Still going, brother.
Thank you. All right, well, we will consider ourselves adjourned and officially networking. Great lunch. We were going to Tzatziki's afterwards if y'all wanted to.
Sorry, my diet doesn't.
Keto. He's on the keto, right? Yeah, I'm flipping a little bit.
Want to get a Greek salad?
Flipping, Drew.
What a Greek salad.